The grief of losing a spouse is a unique type of pain. Unfortunately, when it comes to the finances, that spouse, as they have to carry on, could also be subject to income loss and tax penalties that could result the following year. As a result of going from a joint income and a married filing jointly status to a single status and losing some potential income from that spouse, the surviving spouse could be facing issues that they wouldn't otherwise have faced prior to the loss of their beloved spouse. What we're referring to is often referred to as the widow's penalty or the widower's penalty. And what we'll do in this video today is discuss why exactly this occurs. We'll go through a brief case study to show how this occurs. And lastly, we'll talk through some strategies that you may want to consider to see if you can avoid seeing a surviving spouse or you as a surviving spouse avoiding this type of penalty. If we haven't met yet, my name is Danny Cieniewicz. I'm a CFP professional from Hyperion Financial. The information discussed today is meant to be general in nature only and educational and not meant to be taken as investment or financial planning advice. There are, generally speaking, two financial things right off the bat that a surviving spouse would end up facing. The first is usually some level of a loss of income. The second are adverse tax effects, and those can come in up to 4 different ways. The first one being new marginal tax brackets that a single filer would have rather than a married filing jointly couple. The second one could be IRMA surcharges, otherwise known as Medicare premium surcharges. The third could be taxability of their Social Security that they may face, which they wouldn't have faced prior. And lastly, depending on your state of residence, state income tax could also be affected. Let's first talk through income loss. This generally can come about from 2 sources of guaranteed income that a spouse may have. While this isn't the case for everybody, the first could be pension benefits that would be surrendered. Pension benefits usually take place when one spouse or another has some level of a guaranteed income stream for the rest of his or her life. We've done videos prior on pension benefits and why making this selection does matter. I'll link to that one here. Depending on the continuation option that a spouse would have chosen, if it's anything other than 100% joint and survivor life, the surviving spouse, if he or she was not the original employee, would likely notice some level of a decrease in pay. It's important to note that if you're currently relying on pension income, that you know what the continuation option is for the surviving spouse. The second would be Social Security benefits, and in nearly any case from a married couple to an individual couple, there's likely to be a Social Security decrease. If the spouse with the higher benefit is the one who passes away, the good news is the surviving spouse can end up stepping up to their benefit, which again is a helpful benefit within Social Security. However, that surviving spouse would be foregoing either their benefit that they were receiving or the spousal benefit that they were receiving, which either way would result in some level of a loss of income. But when it comes to taxes, that's something that almost assuredly is going to have some level of an effect. The first thing that we want to look at are the changes in marginal tax bracket that would take place due to a different filing status. Assuming the surviving spouse does not plan to remarry, the surviving spouse would go from a married filing jointly status to a single filing status. As you can see in both the 2024 and the 2025 ordinary income marginal tax brackets, single filers will reach a higher percentage of their tax rate with less of a threshold. On top of this, the standard deduction for a single filer is nearly half what it would be for a married filing jointly couple. It's also worth talking through retirement account transfers. So both Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs can be transferred over to the surviving spouse's name, and the surviving spouse is eligible to treat that IRA as his or her own IRA. They can also utilize this as an inherited IRA, but specifically what we want to refer to are pre-tax IRAs, because pre-tax IRAs in just about every single circumstance will have an accompanying required minimum distribution along with it. That required minimum distribution represents taxable ordinary income. That taxable ordinary income can again bump the surviving spouse into a higher tax bracket than they would have been previously. This can take place in federal income brackets, but depending on your state of residence, it could also take place in state income tax brackets. The good news is that the retirement account transfer should allow for a similar level of income if the spouse is relying upon that income. However, the bad news is that that RMD is unlikely to change taxable income from when they were married filing jointly to when they're single. And as we saw just a few moments ago, more of an RMD means more taxable income. More taxable income means more tax due. I think to help illustrate this, we should take a look using some of our tax planning software. So what you're going to see here is a general information showing in the year 2023 when we have a couple who was married filing jointly versus in 2024 when we now have just a single filer. Obviously, the names have been blacked out for privacy's sake, but in this case, the couple has the husband pass away in 2023, which is the last year in which the surviving wife can file married filing jointly. After his passing, she's set to file as a single filer in the tax year 2024. We're going to keep taxable interest the same as it would have been. However, with their IRA distributions, we're going to up those just a little bit due to the fact that there's a higher required minimum distribution. We're going to have the same taxable pensions and annuities because this husband and wife were able to choose the 100% joint and survivor annuity on their pension. You're going to see here that the gross Social Security, though, is going to decrease. And the reason that is because with the husband passing away, the spouse was able to collect on the higher benefit, but she forgoes the spousal benefit, which was half of his benefit. Therefore, she's going to receive about 2/3 of the Social Security that they were receiving previously as married filing jointly. For the illustration's sake, we're going to keep long-term capital gains the same. But as we can see down at their total income, she is receiving about $14,000 less than she would have been the previous year as a married filing jointly couple. As you can see here, what ends up happening is even though the adjusted gross income is lower as a single filer, there's going to be more tax that is due. If we take a look here, the standard deduction is again almost half of what it would have been the year before. Her total tax is higher. So even though she's still in the same marginal bracket, her effective rate is 3.7% higher than it was the previous year, despite making less income. This spouse also has another penalty which could be coming due, which would be a Medicare premium surcharge on her Part B and D premiums 2 years from now. We won't know that for sure until those brackets are officially released, but there's a probability that this could be taking place. Speaking of those Medicare premium surcharges, what we want to understand is that this is based off your modified adjusted gross income. So you don't apply the standard deduction when considering the Medicare premium surcharges. This is also based on a cliff schedule. It's not based on a marginal bracket, which means that if she is $1 over that threshold, she's subject to both the Medicare Parts B and D monthly premiums for that full year. If a couple is also relying on capital gains income, there's also no escape from this. Again, if we can see the 2024 and 2025 capital gains brackets, there isn't much of a break for a married filing jointly to a single filer. It's essentially cut in half at the income level that they would be at. Therefore, of her long-term capital gains which exceed the threshold, they'll be taxed at a 15% federal rate. We also did a video about the taxation of Social Security, which again, I'm linking to now. But the thresholds for single filers are lower than they would be for married filing jointly filers. Therefore, provisional income is much easier to exceed the thresholds as a single filer would be than it would be for a married filing jointly couple. Lastly, state taxes can also play a role. If your state taxes retirement income, you could see a situation where a single filer's bracket is less advantageous than a married filing jointly bracket, just like we see at the federal level. Depending on your state of residence and retirement, this could have another negative effect. The best way to help alleviate this potential penalty is to make sure that you and your spouse are aware of what's to come, assuming one spouse is projected not to make it much longer. The other way that you can also work to lower the impact of the widow or the widower's penalty is to diversify your income sources. And while we talk about diversification from an investment standpoint, it's also important to make sure that you're diversifying income from a tax standpoint. How you receive income in retirement is especially important when you're trying to make sure that you're lowering lifetime taxable liability. By having different sources of income that you can tap into, you can make sure that your strategy is sound and that you're paying the least amount of tax, regardless of the things that are outside your control, such as the loss of a spouse. If you haven't yet, now would be a great time to consider subscribing to the channel to make sure that you can learn more about strategies and tips for retirees and make sure that you're living your best retirement. My team and I at Hyperion Financial focus on this type of planning, so be sure to check out HyperionFP.com if you haven't yet for more great content, information, and how you can set an appointment with myself and my team to get your retirement on track.